We are picking up, I believe, on 1322, page 1322, with Hamlet taking the skull of Yorick in his hands. And this is like, if I remember correctly, this is about the one. This is the second or third skull that the clown, the gravedigger, throws up. And he tells Hamlet whose it is. We find out how old Hamlet is as a result of that. Hamlet's 30 years old because the gravedigger says, I've been sexton here, man and boy, since the time when Hamlet Sr. killed Fortinbras. He says, when was that? The day young Hamlet was born, man and boy, 30 years. Yorick's been dead for 23 years, we've been told. So Hamlet now says, I knew him, Horatio, a fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy. Fancy meaning imagination. He hath borne me on his back 1,000 times. And now how abhorred in my imagination it is. My gorge rises at it. Is he saying that his imagination, the image in his mind is abhorrent of riding on Yorick's back? No. It's the imagination, the remembering that, the image in his mind of that, while looking at Yorick's head in his hands. That's what makes his gorge rise. That is what makes him feel like he's going to vomit. Okay? Here hung those lips that I've kissed I know not how oft. They're not there anymore. Where be your jibes, your jokes, your gambols, your songs, your flashes of merriment, that were wont to set the table on a roar? Not one now to mock your own grinning? Quite chapfallen? Chaps his lips, because they've fallen off. Now get you to my lady's chamber and tell her, let her paint an inch thick. To this favor she must come. To this favor, to this beauty, because favor means something beautiful. All right? We're going to read a poem later on where a guy's going to talk about my favor at her breast, his wife's breast. He's not going to talk about her beautiful breast. He's talking about a gem that he's given her that she wears on a necklace. Okay, and it's this beautiful thing. Okay? So, go to my lady's chamber. Who's this lady? Who's he talking about?
Never good when you don't want to do it like me.
I think it's possibly any lady. Any woman of, somewhat high birth. It might be Gertrude. Okay? What's his point? Yorick, take your skull, run to my lady's chamber where she's putting on her paint, makeup, an inch thick. What's his emphasis on? We've already heard Hamlet about women putting on makeup to do what? To paint themselves new faces. Here, this is called a memento mori, reminder of death or remembrance of death. Go, little skull, to her room while she's putting on makeup, trying to make herself prettier. For what purpose? You could put on all the makeup, Max Factor, Maybelline, etc. in the world, and you're still going to look like this. Everyone dies. There's a trope in late medieval Renaissance painting, portraiture, that you paint someone, often someone would commission a painting to be done when they were in the prime of life. One of the poets we're going to read later on, John Donne, had a couple of paintings done. He was not too poorly off, but he had a couple of paintings done during his life. One when he was about 20, 23 years old. And he's got this hat and this beautiful outfit on, and he's handsome, and he's looking seductive, all that kind of stuff. Okay? And yet, somewhere, if I remember correctly, somewhere in that painting is a skull. The most famous one is one of the Dutch philosopher, theologian, etc., Erasmus. Erasmus is, I said in my first class, he was prime of life. He's not. He's a little bit older there. But if it's the one I'm thinking of, and I may be wrong, it might not be Erasmus at all. But I'm thinking it is. Here's this guy, looks, middle age, and he's got his hand resting on a skull. And it's all to emphasize this becomes this. No matter where you are, remember, you too die. Okay? Don't mean to beat the horse. So, go to the girl's chamber while she's paying on the makeup. Make her laugh. Horatio, tell me one thing. What's that, my lord? Dost thou think Alexander looked at this fashion in the earth? Alexander the Great. Greatest, in one sense, greatest emperor who ever lived, conquered the widest territory of land. Okay? Yep. And smelt this way? Wow. Now, does this skull in and of itself smell? No. Because it's been in ground 30 years. There's no organic, so to speak, material left on it. What smells? Okay, I said, I'm pretty sure this is the third skull that's been thrown up. Why? Because the gravedigger is digging in a previous grave. The first skull that the gravedigger dug up was what? The most recent burial. So he had to dig through that one. Then there's another one. Had to dig through that one. It's not only the skull being dug up, it's femurs and ribs. And he gets down. It stinks because of everything else he's had to go through to get to this. Okay? And when the gravedigger's hand is probably covered with this mud, this loam, which, again, used Hamlet's thinking. The body turns into this, worms, etc. That's why it stinks. So Hamlet says, to what base uses we may return, Horatio? And I didn't mention this in my first class, but look at the stage direction just before that. He puts the skull down on the ground. Okay? To what base uses we may return. The language, in one sense, is a verbal reinforcement of the action. He puts the skull what? On the base, the ground. See, when we're like we are right now, upright, alive, aware, young, happy, whatever, okay? We're not returned to base uses. The word base, two meanings. Ground, foundation. From dust thou art to dust thou shalt return. That's one meaning. What's the other meaning of base? It's not musical, because that's B-A-S-S. Low, common, ordinary, vulgar even. To what, he's going to tell us what those base uses are. Why may not imagination trace the noble dust of Alexander till it find it stopping a bunghole? Well, remember he talked to Claudius when they asked him about Polonius, and he's telling him about Polonius, and he says, why, your king and your beggar, they're both the same thing, and one can go through the progress of another. Because the king dies, you bury the king, a worm eats of the king's body, a person catches the worm to put on a hook, goes fishing, the fish eats the worm, you eat the fish, and the king goes through your body. That's tracing it, the imagination. He's saying, why can't the imagination do the exact same thing with Alexander the Great? Till you find him stopping a bunghole. What's a bunghole? It's the hole in a cask, like a cask of beer or a cask of wine. Hamlet's going to use the beer in a moment. Okay? Horatio, for to consider too curiously, okay, too minutely, Hamlet, don't go there. It's too particular. Hamlet said, no, not a bit. but to follow it thither with modesty enough and likelihood to lead it. For example, Alexander died, Alexander was buried. Alexander returned to dust. The dust is earth. Of earth we make loam, clay. And why of that loam, whereto he was converted, turned into, might not stop a beer barrel. What? What is Hamlet's whole point in this? What was his point in talking about worms, maggots, feeding animals to feed ourselves, to feed worms, etc.? To what end? Death. To what end? What is the purpose of Alexander the Great? The pupil of Aristotle, the pupil of Plato, the pupil of Socrates, the great pupil of Socrates. The one who took in all the wisdom of the three greatest philosophers who ever lived. To be a piece of clay to stop the hole in a beer barrel. That's the reason he existed. Imperious Caesar, dead and turned to clay, might stop a hole to keep the wind away. Oh, that earth which kept the world in awe should patch a wall to expel the winter's flaw. I always use the example, when I was in college on Lookout Mountain, I lived for a period for about 6 months in a cabin, log cabin, built in the 1940s. There were several cabins. They were built as kind of summer, vacation places for people. They were crappily built. They were horrible. And this was 45 years after they were built. Well, the one I lived in, log walls, cedar log walls, but the chinking in a lot of places was missing or had holes in it. Chinking is the mortar that goes between the logs. And you could see daylight through the walls at various points. Well, I moved into that log cabin January of 1985. January of 1985 is when Tennessee had its coldest weather on record, up to that point. On Lookout Mountain, 3 days below zero. We didn't get above zero for 3 full days. Okay? I had to nail blankets up the room I was in on all the walls, because otherwise I'd see daylight and the blankets would move from the blow of the wind. He's saying, why couldn't Caesar dig up some dirt, wet it, and patch that hole? What's his point? Oh, how the mighty have fallen. Here comes the king. And then comes the king and queen, Laertes, and the corse, that is, the body, of Ophelia in procession with priests, lords, etc. Queen, courtiers, who is this they follow? And with such maimed rites. That is, the king and queen aren't leading this procession with Ophelia's body behind them. It's the body's going, and the king and queen, Laertes, etc., are following. But notice Hamlet says, and with such maimed rites. What does it mean to maim something? In one sense, I'm maimed now. Willfully, I chose this, But if my arm was lopped off, I would be permanently maimed. How can rites be maimed? Ritual, ceremony. May 6th, King Charles is going to be officially crowned, coronated, okay? It's going to be something we haven't seen the likes of since 1953, when Queen Elizabeth was crowned. They're going to bring down the stone of scone from Scotland, the whole 9 yards, all right? They're not going to abbreviate the process. That's what's meant. Prayers cut out. Hymns cut out. They're maimed. They're broken. Okay? Hamlet says, this doth betoken, this indicates, this means, this signals that the corpse they follow, did with desperate hand fordo it on life. The body that's wrapped up in the shroud, the person that was that body, killed him or herself. Now, Hamlet's just told us something. He understands the church rites. He can tell from watching and hearing something's wrong with this picture. 'Twas of some estate, that is, the person was of some high status or high standing in society. He says, let's sit back and watch. Okay? Laertes. What ceremony else? What other prayers? What other rituals? That's Laertes. A very noble youth. What ceremony else? Notice he asked it twice. He hasn't been answered. Her obsequies have been thus as far enlarged as we have warranty. Her prayers, our prayers and morning duties for Ophelia, the first priest says, have gone as far as we can go. Her death was doubtful. The coroner, it is implied, has ruled. Okay, we know the cause of death. She drowned. What caused her to drown, that's what we're not sure about. But that great command o'ersways the order, she should in ground unsanctified have lodged till the last trumpet. Because her death was doubtful, because we don't know that hers was a lawful death, we know nobody killed her, so it's not homicide. He's saying she should have been buried where? Outside the churchyard. Now, the churchyard might have a fence around it, and she could be buried just on the other side of the fence. But it's still outside. It's unhallowed ground. Where she would have lodged until the last trumpet, that is, until the day of resurrection, when the good and the bad are all raised. For charitable prayers, the for there means instead of, or rather than. Charitable prayers, shards, flints, and pebbles should be thrown at her. She's gotten charitable prayers. Charitable with love. But charitable, caritas, is kind of divine love. Okay? We're showing divine mercy. And the prayers are for begging God's mercy on her soul. Let me back up a couple lines because I want to make one thing clear. What's the great command? And but that great command o'ersways the order. The kings. Only reason Ophelia is being buried in the churchyard is because the king ordered it. Okay? No, she should be buried outside the churchyard, and instead of flowers and prayers on her casket, people should be throwing broken pieces of pottery and rocks and flints. But here she is allowed her virgin krantz, flowers, her maiden struments, and the bringing home of bell and burial. Bell could be referred to the tolling of the bell to indicate, someone has died. It could also be the bell of like a censer, as the body or the coffin is censed by the priest. Okay? A non-Christian burial would not have that. The priest would not cense the dead with incense, Incense is a visual indication of the prayers rising before God. Laertes, must there be no more done? No more be done. We should profane the service of the dead to sing a requiem and such rest to her as to peace-parted souls. In other words, we would make unholy, to profane, the holy services we do for people who died, for lack of a better word, righteously, who received last rites, all that kind of stuff. Okay? And what he really means by that, what the priest really means is, we would be making a mockery of what we do. Okay? Laertes. lay her in the earth, and from her fair and unpolluted flesh. Notice what he's saying. My sister was a saint. My sister was an angel. May violet spring, I tell thee, churlish priest. Churlish means lowborn. A ministering angel shall my sister be when thou liest howling. In other words, when you're rotting in the pit of hell, okay, my sister is going to be up there in heaven playing the harp and, whatever. Hamlet. What? The fair Ophelia. Hamlet doesn't know until now. Queen scatters flowers. It's what you do. And the queen tells us something. I hoped thou shouldst have been my Hamlet's wife. Is that possibly indicated anywhere earlier? Just before Polonius lets loose his daughter on Hamlet, beginning Act 3, Scene 1. Anybody remember what the queen tells Ophelia? She says, she prays, God's grace be with her, essentially. And then says, I hope that you can bring Hamlet back to himself so that honors may be done to him and to you. And I kind of alluded, what might those honors be? I don't think I said at the time. I think I said I would mention it later. But I might have said it at the time. This. I hope that you would be Hamlet's wife. Even though, I've said multiple times, she is what? She's not royal born. She's not a princess. I hoped thou shouldst have been my Hamlet's wife. I thought thy bride bed to have decked, sweet maid. She'd hoped, as the future mother-in-law, to get the bridal bower ready for the wedding night. An idea is to strew the bed like with rose petals to make it sweet smelling, and not have strewed thy grave. Interesting juxtaposition there, because her grave kind of has become her bridal bed. She's married to death now rather than Hamlet. Okay? Laertes has a speech expressing his woe and sorrow. He jumps into Ophelia's grave. Why? What purpose does he have to live? Father's dead, sister's dead. He says, now, let me back up. Oh, trouble, woe, 3 times. Fall 10 times, treble, 30 times, on that cursed head whose wicked deed thy most ingenious sense deprived thee of. What's the wicked deed that has deprived her of her ingenious sense? Well, think about that for a minute. If suicide is the wicked deed that has deprived her of her ingenious sense, what is he wishing upon the head that committed the suicide, meaning hers? Oh, treble woe, fall 10 times treble on that cursed head. He doesn't want 30 times of woe to fall on his sister's head. So the deed has to be what? What caused her to commit suicide?
Death of her father.
The death of her father. And who's responsible for that? Hamlet. Okay? So, 30 times woe fall on Hamlet's head. Okay? Notice who he's blaming. Notice what he's blaming. Let me put it that way. What he's blaming for causing Ophelia to go crazy. The death of her father. Is that it? Or is that one of multiple causes that causes her to go crazy? What are some of the other causes? What possibly is the first cause? Okay, that's Hamlet. Is that where it begins?
Polonius' advice.
And just before that, Laertes' advice to his sister. Hamlet doesn't love you. He just wants sex. He's so far outside of your league. Why? He's a prince. He doesn't mean he's so much more gorgeous than you are, Ophelia. Doesn't mean that at all. He just means social status. Polonius comes in and redoubles that. But he does something that Laertes doesn't do. Laertes doesn't say, Ophelia, man, come on, stay away from Hamlet. Polonius does. Make your maiden presence scarcer, he says. So she stops seeing Hamlet. And the next thing we see, Hamlet's in her room with her, holding her in, looking crazy, shaking. Okay? And then what happens? What's Hamlet's next interaction, apparently, with Ophelia? So she's told to make herself scarce. She does. Hamlet sees her one time, acts crazy. Get thee to a nunnery. But he only says that when? Laertes is in France, but Claudius and Polonius are spying. But Hamlet says that whole get thee to a nunnery and all that stuff when in that scene. Only after Hamlet says, Nymph, be my sins remembered in thy orisons, and she says some things, and then she says, I have some things of yours. What is she doing there? I thought you loved me. Oh man, when I thought you loved me. The sweet smell of your words just sent me over. And Hamlet knows, I think at least, Hamlet knows what at that point. Damn, not you too. I think Hamlet knows when she does that, they've even turned Ophelia against me. Bad enough his mom's against him. He expects his uncle to be against him. It's like, man, what would happen if they turned Horatio, his best friend? And that's when he does the whole, I did love you once, I didn't love you, go to a nunnery, breed maggots, etc. Okay? It's interesting that he says this. Woe, trouble times, etc., etc. What's going to happen? It's a bit of dramatic irony. Because he's going to suffer that woe. Okay? Hamlet jumps in the grave. What is he whose grief bears such an emphasis? Whose phrase of sorrow conjures the wandering stars, makes them stand like wonder-wounded hearers? I love this line. This is I, Hamlet the Dane. Come on. Man up. Finally, Hamlet acts. Laertes, the devil take thy soul. And we're told they grapple. Well, they don't just grapple. Because grapple is like Greco-Roman wrestling, where you grab each other and you try to throw each other out of the circle, so to speak. No, we get a stage direction in the dialogue. The priest not well, I prithee take thy fingers from my throat. He's being strangled to death by Laertes. The devil take thy soul. Now that's a perfectly fine line if this weren't Hamlet, the play. Why? It'd be fine in Seneca. It'd be fine in Thomas Kyd's A Spanish Tragedy. Because Seneca I'm definitely sure about. Spanish Tragedy I'm 95% sure of. Neither of those are set within a quote-unquote Christian society. The devil take thy soul is not a very Christian prayer. Go to hell. You're not supposed to say that to your enemies. You're supposed to forgive them. How often? Peter asks, because he's thinking, okay, maybe once or twice. And Jesus says 70 times 7. It's like, really? Damn, Stop. Okay? For though I am not splenitive and rash, splenitive, hot-tempered. How do we know Hamlet isn't hot-tempered? Because Claudius is still standing on the ground outside the grave, sucking air. He hasn't killed him yet. He's had what? He's definitely had means. He definitely has motive. And he's had opportunity. But he hasn't done anything. Okay? King has separate them, so they get them separated. And Hamlet says, I will fight with him upon this theme until my eyelids will no longer wag. Your gloss tells you for a wag. Move. Yes. What does it really mean? Bingo. I'll fight Laertes on this theme till we're both dead. Gertrude. Thank you, Gertrude. What theme, Hamlet? I mean, oh, my son. What theme? What the hell are you talking about, son? I loved Ophelia. Now, some critics think Hamlet's not telling the truth. That this is all part of Hamlet's madness. I think they're crazy. Okay? Some actors don't think Hamlet is serious here. I think it's the play. I don't see how you can't read it. My own reading. You can't read it as Hamlet not loving Ophelia. 40,000 brothers could not, with all their quantity of love, make up my sum. And the way some read that is, well, of course, because 40,000 brothers would still have brotherly love for Ophelia. And unless you want to go there, your love, Hamlet, is different than that. It's not what he means. Oh, he's mad, Laertes, King says. For love of God, forbear him. That is, endure, suffer him. Don't hurt him, Laertes. Hamlet is on a roll. Okay? Question. Is Hamlet acting? Here. Is he feigning madness? No. Is he borderline crazy? At this point, at this particular moment, yes, he is. Why? Polonius said the words before. Mad for love. His girlfriend, the love of his life, is dead. When my wife had cancer, and I would, because of the kind of nature I have, I go to worst case scenario. Everything that happens. Somebody's not home, I immediately worst case scenario. Sheriff shows up, they're dead, whatever. Okay? Why? You prepare. If it's not the worst, hey, better off. Maybe they're only physically maimed, etc. I can't imagine what this would be like. I've known people who've had this happen. A friend in college got AIDS. He was a hemophiliac. This was back when AIDS was new. Got a bad blood transfusion. He and his girlfriend were engaged. They got married. He died like 6 months later. Okay? Similar thing. Come on, show me what you'll do, he says to Laertes. Will you weep? Will you fight? Will you fast? Will you tear thyself? Will you drink isel, that is poison? Will you eat a crocodile? Where the crocodile comes from, I have no idea. Maybe Shakespeare just wants to say, I know there are crocodiles in the world, I'll do it too. Did you come here to whine? To outface me? With leaping in her grave? Now what's he doing? I loved Ophelia more than you did. Yeah, nanny, boo-boo, Be buried quick with her, so will I. Let him throw mountains of dirt on us. Come on. What will you do to what? What's everything he's saying suggest? To show your love. What did Hamlet do earlier to show Ophelia his love? He wrote songs, he wrote poetry, he gave her cards. I don't think I could be misleading, misreading, misremembering. I don't think I've ever known a woman who would ever turn down a poem written for her, even if it's a bad one, or a song. Queen, this is mere madness. Okay? Hamlet, what is the reason you use me thus? Hamlet doesn't respond to what his mother says. F off, Mom. He looks at Laertes. Why are you acting this way? I loved you ever. Not homoerotically, like some idiot critics want to suggest. He means, Laertes, we've always got along. We've always been friends. The implication, almost, I'm not saying it is, almost, is that Laertes was almost like a brother to Hamlet. That's why he says, it's the noble Laertes. Okay? Let Hercules himself, but it is no matter. It doesn't matter anymore. Why? Look at the next two lines. Let Hercules himself do what he may, the cat will mew, and dog will have his day. In other words, what will be, will be. Nature is going to take its course at this point. The avalanche has already started. The king, Horatio, wait upon him. That is, calm him down, get him some Xanax, and some whiskey. Mix the two together. Hamlet and Horatio enter a hall in the castle, scene 2. They enter talking. So much for this now. That is what we've been talking about. Now let me tell you some other stuff. Okay? And they're talking about Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and they're plotting with the king against Hamlet. Hamlet says, methought I lay worse than the mutinies in the bilboes, that is, in the bellies of the ship. And the mutinies is probably referring to the pirates coming to attack and such. Rashly, and praised rashness, praise be rashness for it. Let us know our indiscretion sometime serves us well when our deep plots do pall. What is indiscretion? What does it mean to be indiscreet? Because that's a different meaning. To be indiscreet means you don't do things silently, on the sly, without everybody noticing. Indiscretion means without forethought, without planning, immediately, and somewhat in the open. So our indiscretion, or doing things boldly, baldly, out in the open, sometimes serves us well, what? When our plots, our conspiracies, don't fit our ends, don't come to completion. And that should learn us, should teach us. There's a divinity that shapes our ends, rough hew them how we will. Rough hew. What does it mean to hew something? A hue and cry isn't the same kind of hue. This is H-E-W. It's a carpentry. It's a woodworking term. You take a log, you cut down a tree, you take the log, and you get an axe or what's called a draw knife, and you peel the bark off the axe, off the tree. So now you have a round log. Well, that round log isn't really that helpful if you're, for example, building a home. It's better if they're square. So you take that axe or that draw knife and you start peeling wood off to make what was round into something square. That is rough hewing. I'm into woodworking. There's these guys, Latvia, they do this barefoot. They stand on the log with an axe, with a blade about 12 inches wide, and they sit there and they rough hew that sucker because they were born essentially doing it. Family of hewers, etc. So that's the rough hewing. He says we rough hew what? Our ends. Ends, both meanings of the word that we've talked about before. The purposes of why we exist and how our lives are completed. How do we do that? How do we rough hew our lives? All the decisions and actions we take, they all kind of give some shape and direction. But there's a divinity, he says, that does what? That shapes that end. We rough hew them. The divinity does what? It says, I've got the perfect thing for you to fit into. Okay? So God working in tandem with our actions. Horatio, that's most certain. Why? We don't see the other kind of end. We don't see our end. We kind of like to. We think I'm going to achieve XYZ by the time I retire or maybe by the time I die. What don't we know? When we die. I'll bet you every one of those 9-year-olds last week. One, never thought they would die at 9. But two, probably had ideas, plans. And every one of those 60-year-olds, 60 and 2 that were 61, also. But there's a hell of a big difference between being 9 and 61. Because when you're 61, you've lived the vast majority of your life. I'm 61. I'm 3/4 of the way in the grave, more than likely. 9 years old, you're not even walking towards the grave at that point. Okay? So, Hamlet describes what? He took the letters. He forged his own letter. He says, you could read the letter here. And he pulls the mandate that Claudius gave to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. And he hands it to Horatio. Okay? And Horatio wants to know, how did you seal your letters? Because the King of England isn't going to follow what the letter says unless it has the king's seal or the seal of Denmark. Okay? Two different things possibly. I'm not wearing it. I've got a ring at home, it was my grandfather's, that has an image of a knight carved in the onyx stone, tiger's eye, on the top. If I wanted to, I could use that to seal wax. He's talking about you get a letter, you write in it, you fold it in thirds, like this, dip wax, and then hold that ring on it, pull it off, and it's got a seal. He says, I still have my father's, which is a royal seal. It's not the great seal, like the Great Seal of England. I've seen it. It's about this big in diameter. Okay? So when you dip wax on the thing, it's a big blob of wax. All right? He says, I sealed it with my father's signet ring. So Rosencrantz, 57, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern go to it. That means are dead. They did make love to this appointment. They wanted this so badly. Does he mean they wanted to kill me? Not necessarily. But they wanted to do whatever they could to get into Claudius's good graces. They are not near my conscience. Meaning, I feel no guilt for what happens to them. That's pretty bold. Their defeat does by their own insinuation grow. 'Tis dangerous when the baser nature comes between the past and felt incense points of mighty opposites. He uses a fencing terminology. Why? Because they're about to fence. He doesn't know that yet, but Shakespeare does, and he's introducing it. They, baser natures, they are lowborn. They're doing what? They're getting involved in dangerous stratagems between powerful people. What did Claudius say? Madness and great ones must unwatched not go. Okay? Hamlet saying, I'm a great one. Claudius is a great one. Hammer, anvil. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. What a king is this, says Horatio. And I think that's because he's been skimming the letter while Hamlet's talking. Does it not think thee stand me now upon? What does he mean? He that hath killed my king and whored my mother. What did Hamlet just say? My mother's a whore. It's the first time he said that. Yeah, your mom's a hoe. He that hath killed my king and whored my mother, popped in between the election and my hopes. What election? The election of the king's advisors as to who should be king next. Claudius' opening speech, that's what he's talking about partially. Not only that they went along with his marriage to the dead king's wife, his sister-in-law, but that they also went along with electing him king. Who do you think put his name forward? Popped in between the election and my hopes, thrown out his angle, fishing metaphor, for my proper life. He tried to bait me. And with such cousinage, such trickery and stratagems and conspirings, is it not perfect conscience? That is, am I not totally guilt-free to quit him, kill him, use my good one, relatively, with this arm? Aren't I entirely justified? He's asking Horatio. Moreover, is it not to be damned to let this canker of our nature come in further evil? What does he mean with the second part? The first part, I think most people would go, okay, he killed your father, he whored your mother, he took your position as rightful king. Yeah, he deserves to die. Okay, we get that. But Hamlet's kind of suggesting, but what if that's not enough? What's the second part? Is it not to be damned to let this canker of our nature? What's canker? Your gloss tells you. Ulcer. Or possibly the worm which destroys buds and leaves. Apply that to our nature. Sin. To let this sin. Claudius is a walking, breathing, living, talking sin. Of what? Of our nature, of humanity. In further evil. Hamlet / Shakespeare is introducing an idea, goes back to Catholic theology. I don't know that the Protestants held it as much at this point because it wasn't entirely, all worked out. Just law theory in the Catholic Church is it has to be self-defense. I think, with one exception. A nation can bring war against another nation, against another leader. A king can bring war against another leader. Pretty sure this is part of just war theory. If it's to stop that leader from increasing an evil it is already doing. Okay? For example, Hitler. Hitler's a great example for everything bad. Hitler. Was it just, would it have been just, for another nation, another leader, to kill Hitler, to stop Hitler from continuing his genocide? Yes. A German theologian, a German Lutheran theologian named Dietrich Bonhoeffer conspired with a few other people to kill Hitler. They nearly succeeded. They got the briefcase bomb in the room. It went off. Hitler was hurt. Bonhoeffer was caught, as were the other conspirators, and they all died. Okay? I think, I'm not positive, that the Catholic Church also suggested, Protestants do suggest this, and we'll rephrase it. I won't say all Protestants. C.S. Lewis suggests this in his little essay, Why I Am Not a Pacifist. That it is morally just to kill someone to stop that person from, what's the word I want? Doing a worse evil. That is, the person is doing an evil now and has done evil. And you're killing that person to stop them from doing more. But it's not just enough to stop them from doing more. It's to stop that person from doing more harm to his or her own soul. How so? If you kill one person, it's bad, right? You kill two, it's worse. You kill four, it's even worse. The idea is, the more you kill, the more guilt you put upon yourself. So if you can stop someone who's killed 10 from killing 20, you're actually doing a mercy to them. Because they're not doing worse. So in that sense, if one person had taken Stalin out before the purges, beginning in 1935 or so, millions would have stayed alive. Okay? He says, wouldn't I be damned if I let him keep going? Horatio, you know he's going to know how you got back from England and what happened. He goes, yeah, the interim is mine. What does the word interim literally mean? Between time. The time between. Does time stop? No. But he's like, the time between now and the king finding that out, I have control of. And then he tells Horatio, I am sorry about Laertes. Why? Hamlet's calmed down a little bit. And what has he realized? To Laertes I forgot myself, for by the image of my cause I see the portraiture of his. Hamlet looks into his soul, and what is there? Kill Claudius. Right? Why? Because Claudius killed my father. And I killed Polonius. I killed Laertes' father. Now I see why he is the way he is. Okay? So, Osric comes in, which we're going to skip most of. We're going to skip all of. And Osric comes in and says, the king and queen of Laertes, they request your presence. They want to play a game and have you and Laertes do a fencing match. And the king has wagered that you will win. Hamlet says, cool, I'll be there shortly. Okay? Horatio tells him, you're not going to win. You're going to lose. Way to go, best friend. That's a way to... Hamlet, top of 1330. I do not think so. That is, I don't think Laertes is going to win. Since he went into France, I've been in constant practice. I shall win at the odds. Why? Because there are going to be odds placed on this fencing match. And it's like, Hamlet has to win by so many points. He says, I don't have to win outright. I just have to beat the odds. But thou wouldst not think how ill all's here about my heart. He's saying, I don't know why, something's bothering me. Laertes, it's just a foolery. Kind of a gain given. In other words, butterflies. If your mind dislike anything, obey it. I'll tell them you don't feel well. If your mind dislike anything, we have a phrase today, it doesn't have to do your mind. It's what? Follow your gut. And if your gut tells you, if your gut's a little uneasy about something, don't do it. Not a whit, Hamlet says. We defy augury. What's augury? Fortune telling, predicting the future. Why? There's a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. How do we know? Jesus says so in the Gospels. God knows when every sparrow falls. Do you not think he cares much more for you? He knows the hairs of your head, etc. If it be now, 'tis not to come. What's the it? The fall of a sparrow. What is it really? Death. Okay. Monday we'll come back. We'll finish Hamlet. We'll pick up with 192. I'll post a quiz over Acts 4 and 5. It'll be due probably Monday night. And I'll also post an exam over all of the drama. So Sophocles and Shakespeare, the introductions, the background kind of stuff. That won't be due till the end of next week. Okay? I'll also revise the last several days of class reading list so that you'll know what to do. For Monday, though, read the reading poetry stuff, all the terms. We won't get to it Monday, but that way you'll have it already in your mind. We won't talk about those terms per se. Just read over them, know the bold-faced ones. I will give you probably a list of those terms that you don't need to know, because that'll be shorter than doing a longer one. All right, have a good weekend.